Welcome to the Week 6 Meta Report for the Secrets of Power season, where my goal is to provide a high-level understanding of the meta. This week we will be covering Weeks 5 and 6, as well as the Munich sector. Starting off with the meta status update. We're still seeing very low play rates for unique leader plus base pairs. There were only 3 decks above 5% play rate, being Yoda Data Vault, Piett Red, and Han2 ECL. Everything else was below a 5% play rate. This results in a very diverse meta where it's not possible to predict a matchup spread. We saw 239 unique leader plus base pairs over the last 2 weeks, with Week 6 PQs having 169 unique pairs, about what we've seen in prior weeks with a similar sample size. We saw 47 unique leader plus base top 8 decks, with week 6 PQs having 39 unique pairs, again what we've seen in previous weeks with a similar sample size. So the meta is still wide. This has not changed from prior weeks and is becoming more likely to continue, as there is no indication this is trending downward. If anything, there's a small indication it's trending upward, but it's not significant. This means we still want to be using proactive strategies, generally powerful strategies, and to avoid using targeted strategies that have large weaknesses. I've included some examples of these on this slide. I will cover why Tarkentown decks fall into the third category later in this video. We will be looking at the best performing decks from the last 2 weeks. This is considering play rates, win rates, and conversion rates. All these decks were around a 56% win rate and an 18% conversion rate. The 6 decks are Yoda Data Vault, Han2 ECL, Han1 Green, Han2 Blue Force, Cad Tarkentown Weenie, and Sabe Tarkentown. We will look at these more in the data analysis section. For those that have followed my previous meta updates, the rise of Han2 ECL shouldn't be a surprise here. This is a deck that was positioned to fill the aggro role that was missing from the format with the fall of Sabine ECL's and Space Aggro's popularity. A much needed spot to be filled to combat various board control strategies like Yoda Data Vault, Anakin, and Qi'ra. This provides a way to go under them with an aggressive go-wide strategies. The Tarkentown decks, however, do stand out a bit here. They are good answers to the rise of Han2 decks, but as we will see in the data analysis section later, they might be folding to a large portion of the meta. This means they might be gambling on dodging a good portion of bad matchups, which is what the data and personal experience suggests. However, they performed well over the last 2 weeks and now need to be given some consideration when choosing to play Han2. It also means we're possibly falling into a bit of a rock, paper, scissors meta. This is a reductive way to look at the meta. Other decks still exist, like Piett and Han1 Green, among other things, and, meta-wide AF. So a lot more to consider here. Which brings us into the meta-analysis section. Here we will be reviewing a few of the more played and better performing decks, and seeing how things are shifting as the season progresses. We will primarily be looking at matchup data and trends with some anecdotal evidence and comments. An important thing to keep in mind for this section is that as player counts on a deck go up, win rate and conversion rate tend to go down. I've discussed a bit about this in the past. It has to do with the more people on a deck, the closer to its average performance the deck will be, rather than some type of extreme. This isn't universal, but it is the general rule. Yoda was the start of season breakout deck, and has continually put up great numbers. While its win rate is down from the mid-60s and its conversion rate isn't pushing 30% anymore, its win rate and conversion rate do still indicate it is in a strong position. We started seeing some cracks in this deck's armor by week 2, like Han2 ECL and Piett Red, with Yoda's more recent performance showing these weaknesses held true. A big reason for this ended up being Han2 in general, adding to its early troublesome matchups of Piett and Han1. This includes Han2 ECL and Han2 Blue. Its matchup spread is still mostly good, and a big thing to note is its strong matchup into the Tarkentown decks, rising to counter Han2. We can see Sabe Tarkentown was almost free for Yoda over the last 2 weeks, and in the larger dataset, this is mostly true for Cad as well. Sabe was something I talked about in one of my previous videos where I said I think people were overvaluing the ability to look at the top card of the deck. It does not change that matchup at all. It can stop You're my only hope, and it can stop some things on the flip. It doesn't change that color combination is still a very bad matchup for Sabe. This is the first part of the rock, paper, scissors I mentioned earlier that is appearing in the dataset. Like Yoda, Hantu ECL is not held to its initial numbers. Week 1 was its only miss on win rate, coming in at 50%, but in week 2 and 3 this deck was going nuts. It was pushing 70% match win rate and 50% conversion rate early on. We see these numbers fall a bit here to a still high 57.8% win rate and 19.3% conversion rate. Looking at the matchup data, we are seeing green, green, green. According to the data, Hantu ECL is a foil to various control skewing strategies like Yoda and Qi'ra, showing its position in the rock, paper, scissors. Now this is the current breakout deck of the format, but it isn't undefeatable. We see 2 decks in the data that stand out as strong answers, namely Cad Tarkintown and Hantu Blue 30, with Sabe Tarkintown and other Tarkintown variants likely joining them. Tarkintown is a natural answer to Hantu's hero ability, and I think what's going on with Hantu Blue 30 is probably Hantu ECL losing the race and having no good ECL targets, as ground and space from Hantu Blue 30 will have high power. This results in ECL not creating a 2-for-1 scenario. This means ECL simply results in being down 5 health in a race, compared to Force, where Hantu ECL is only down 3. Personally, I found Han 1 Green to be an issue as well. When I was playtesting this deck, I could not deal with Stolen, Hauler, racing in space. This is in line with Hantu Blue 30 also having access to a strong early space strategy and being favored in the data. I think beyond Tarkintown decks, strong space lines are a good consideration when considering how to deal with Hantu ECL. Han 1 Green's win rate and conversion rate have also dropped a bit from the earlier numbers. It held around a 60% win rate and 30% conversion rate during the first few weeks of the season. The last 2 weeks have seen it fall to about a 55% win rate and a 20% conversion rate. Moving to the matchup data, guess who's back? Han 2 variants, the consistent thorn in the side of every meta deck. We see them being deep red in these samples. This is contributing to Han 1 Green's overall spread being a bit inconsistent with a healthy distribution of red and green. Han 1 Green is likely another answer to the Tarkintown portion of the meta, as we see in the larger dataset that it is fairly strong into Cad Tarkintown, playing further into the rock, paper, scissors that I've been mentioning, with Han 1 Green possibly falling into a lizard or Spock role rather than the standard rock, paper, or scissors. Han, oh my Han. We have a third Han deck. As a brief aside, I know I've mentioned this before, I was very surprised when this deck just fell off completely at the start of this season. Losing Force Throw really wasn't that big of a deal. It brought a deck that was bonkers broken down to kinda broken. It was still a very strong choice and had some very strong tools added to its toolbox, like Rex and Bo-Katan. These aren't seen as much in the Force version as they are in the 30 version, but they are still great additions to a toolbox that was already deeper than most other decks. This deck has maintained a stable win rate in the mid to high 50s, currently coming in at 57%, and a stable conversion rate averaging around 15%, which we see here. Like Hantu ECL, its matchup spread is almost fully green, with only the Tarkintown deck standing out as foils, putting it with Hantu ECL as being the current boogeyman of the format. Bonus slide, a brief look at Hantu Blue Force compared to Hantu Blue 30. 2 main things to note here. The Hantu Blue 30 sample is very small, even in the full dataset. And Yoda Data Vault is a terrible matchup for Hantu Blue 30, according to this small sample. I can think of 3 explanations for this. First, the sample is just too small. Second, losing Kiadi may result in having too little card advantage to grind. The counterpoint to this is, why is the Qi'ra matchup still favored without Han having access to Kiadi, as it was primarily Kiadi and Force Throw that swung the Qi'ra matchup in Han 2's favor. This could be because Qi'ra has gone down on healing to stay out of range of Crate, or an indication that the sample is simply too small. Third, maybe it's not correct to attack Yoda through space. We saw looking at the Yoda data that is very favored into almost every space deck besides Piett and Han 1, which present big ships very quickly, with the latter primarily doing this through Chewbacca. Han 2 Blue 30 is producing smaller ships relative to these two decks, more in line with Boba Data Vault size ships that Yoda counters. Overall, these decks seem very similar, but the stark comparison in the Yoda Data Vault matchup is something to pay attention to, regardless of the reason for that data. Tarkintown decks. This section will be a little different. Sabe has almost no sample, but has a near identical spread to CAD, with some exceptions, so I will discuss them together. They are very similar, but different decks. Sabe favors space with 1-drops, and CAD favors ground with 1-drops. CAD also has an easier way to trigger Tarkintown with his leader ability. The Sabe deck is interesting because it's essentially the Han 4 Tarkintown deck with a leader swap to Sabe, which, brief aside, doesn't make much sense to me. I've said a few times in my meta videos that Han 4 Tarkintown is being slept on, and Sabe seems like a strict downgrade, but maybe pilot leaders are just too weak in a world of confiscates and constables, so swapping to Sabe, or maybe another leader named Quinlan, could be an improvement. It also has a little more ground tools, but there's no reason Han 4 can't run those same tools. Both decks have not performed well previously, with win rates around or below 50% and conversion rates near 0%. We can see in the dataset that Cat Tarkintown is mostly unfavored into the more played decks, primarily functioning as anti-Han 2 and anti-aggro deck, fulfilling its role as an anti-Han 2 deck in the rock paper scissors of the meta. Sabe likely fills the same role in the meta, but initial data suggests that it has a better Piett matchup with some other minor disparities in the comparison with CAD. What about Anakin, Qi'ra, and Piett? These 3 decks are notable exclusions from the top performers of the last 2 weeks. That doesn't mean they haven't been represented. Piett was the second most played and maintained its usual 50% win rate compared to prior weeks, but his conversion rate dropped a lot, down from the high teens to 11%. Looking at the dataset, we are seeing the rise of Han 2 being an additional issue for this deck, with the blue variants being especially bad. This deck only has a few favored matchups, namely Anakin and Yoda, with Anakin not being favored in the last 2 weeks sample. The issue with this deck is the same as it's always been, and I've discussed it a lot in other videos. To put it simply, it's a weaker version of Han 1 Green with a slightly different matchup spread that needs to high roll its lines to find success. It had its moment when Anakin and Yoda were the 2 most played decks, and does have a proactive and powerful strategy, but it's not consistent, and its previously poor position in the meta is getting worse. For those that have followed my previous meta updates, it shouldn't be a complete surprise that Anakin has really tanked. It's been trending consistently downward since its boom after Beatle. While its win rate quickly dropped to around 50% by week 2 of this season, it had maintained a strong conversion rate up to the last couple weeks, with it falling to near 0% over the last 2 weeks. Possible explanation for this, that I've brought up before, could be the deck having a high skill ceiling, requiring a high level of deck mastery. However, for the average player, this deck has consistently struggled to produce results. And, like Piett, the rise of Han 2 decks seems to be an additional issue for it. I think the near 0% conversion rate for this deck is an over-exaggeration of its poor position in the meta, but it does seem to be struggling a bit more as the aggro and space decks it's looking to capitalize on, like Sabine ECL, Vader Yellow, and Boba Data Vault, continue to drop in popularity. In addition, players may be getting better at playing against this deck as it has utilized gaps in player experience and surprise factors like opponents not managing Anakin's base damage properly, or opponents not playing around surprise tech cards like Overwhelming Barrage or a Timely Wrecker. I think there is a small amount of hope for this deck, as it should function as a foil to Tarkintown decks given its ability to function as a ground-based control deck. Personally, I'm a bit shocked at Qi'ra's stats from the last 2 weeks. Its win and conversion rates are both way down. This was consistently one of the top performing decks of the first few weeks, with conversion rates pushing 30% and win rates around 60%. So what's happened? Well, like with the other decks we've discussed, Han 2 is a menace. Looking at the full dataset, this deck looks solid, but when we shift to the 2-week dataset, the second most played matchup was into Han 2 ECL, and that matchup is rough. Seems to me like the Qi'ras low-rolled their Swiss rounds. This still looks like it's the go-to 50-50 deck, but now risks getting spiked by Han2 ECL, although I do think the matchup isn't as bad as the data suggests here. I've personally been favored into this matchup, but that could be a symptom of a small sample as much as this dataset is also a small sample. So, for those that stuck with this, you get the Palpatine bonus slide. Palp 1 has a very small sample, even with the full dataset. Both popular versions have consistently maintained a high win rate of 60% and conversion rate in the low to mid 20s. Although the sample is small, its matchup spread is one of the best looking that we've seen, with the glaring issues being the few decks that are too fast for it, namely Han2 ECL and Sabine ECL, with no other majorly apparent bad matchups in the data. As a personal note, I do think Palp is harder to win with as opponent skill increases, and we don't see that in a sample like this. Between the two versions, I think the edge goes slightly to Colossus, having a better Yoda matchup and winning against the yellow version. This is my sleeper recommendation. It will not be part of my main recommendations, in no small part because I do think both versions get substantially worse as opponents' skills go up through the course of an event, but it's still a very solid choice. Tier list update. Having looked at the more prominent decks in the meta, will now update my short tier list. On screen is my week 3 tier list. Please pause if you want to take a closer look. We're going to move to the week 6 tier list, and we will see a few changes. Han2 ECL takes the top slot with Yoda Data Vault dropping slightly. Yoda has a lot more red in his matchup spread recently, but is still mostly in the green. Han2 Blue Force moves up from tier 2. I was very tempted to do this in week 3, but didn't because of the small sample. I still think the sample is too small to place him here with certainty, but the current data suggests he may be the best pick after Han2 ECL. Qi'ra goes ahead of Yoda since she's slightly better positioned overall, with Han2 ECL being the only clearly bad matchup. Piett shifts down since his spot as a counterpick is not as cemented, with Yoda and Anakin play rates falling, Anakin being almost non-existent over the last 2 weeks. Anakin should probably shift to tier 3 or even 4 based on the last 2 weeks, but I'm going to give him a little more time to settle. Garin, especially with his low play rates over the last 2 weeks. Garin, the 2 double yellow decks dropped from tier 3 to 4, since outside of a few rare occurrences, they have not found much success. The double yellow decks may be a way to target decks like Han2 ECL, but there's little reason currently to choose them over Tarkentown decks. These have primarily been anti-aggro decks, and Tarkentown decks fill a very similar role. Palpatine moves to tier 3 after some initial success, since that success hasn't been maintained. His position as a foil to decks like Yoda and Qi'ra is better encapsulated by Palp 1 decks, and the rise of Han2 ECL poses a significant risk for Palpatine. Lastly, the Tarkentown decks take up the top of tier 3 as strong counters to Han2 decks, but they come with the heavy risk of losing to most other decks, and the meta is simply too wide to guarantee a mostly Han2 and aggro matchup spread for these decks to capitalize on. Moving to the expanded tier list, this is the week 3 version, pause if you want to take a look at it, and this is the week 6 version. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. Changes here have occurred mostly because of the rise of Han2 ECL, like most of the control decks moving from tier 2 to tier 3. It's fairly subjective, especially when play rates of decks are so low and the meta is so wide, but this is, I think, the closest that I can get it. Various tier 3 decks move to tier 4 due to continually poor performances outside of rare occurrences. Looking at recommended decks for week 7, which includes the Mesa sector. I think there is no obvious first choice here, as every deck currently has some amount of foils, so it ends up being a rock, paper, scissors meta. Always keep in mind that experience trumps deck power. If you do not feel comfortable on a deck, do not bring it. I'd recommend having at least 200 games on any deck before selecting for a PQ or the Mesa sector, and some in-person experience. Han2 ECL is going to be my number 1 recommendation. Its Tarkentown matchup is bad, but the Tarkentown decks are much weaker into the larger field and should be falling off as rounds progress. Tarkentown decks will be less than 10% of the meta, possibly less than 5%, so just dodge them for the first few rounds. Easy, right? Hantu Blue Force is my close second recommendation, with similar rationale to Hantu ECL. Hantu ECL and Blue Force are about 50-50 into each other according to the data, so can't really go wrong with either. But I think the edge goes slightly to Hantu ECL, due to Blue Force having too small of a sample. Qi'ra Data Vault and Yoda Data Vault are nearly tied for my third recommendation, with Qi'ra getting a slight edge. These both have very strong matchup spreads, with Qi'ra's being slightly better for the average player. Qi'ra only needs to dodge Hantu ECL, which probably will be no more than 5% of the meta, although I could see it pushing 10%. Hantu Blue might also be an issue for Qi'ra, but I question the validity of that. Yoda wants to dodge Piett and Hantu Blue in addition to Hantu ECL, so it's looking closer to somewhere around a 10 to 15% of the meta being an issue for the average player, resulting in it being a slightly worse choice than Qi'ra. Tarkentown decks take up a notable mention. I think these are a bait personally. We are not in a Hantu meta. I do not think we will be in a Hantu meta for Mesa and Week 7 PQs. And the meta has been consistently wide this entire set, so choosing decks that primarily target a very small subsection of the meta is not a good way to approach deck selection. I do hope some people bring these to their events and do well with them, as they are a necessary foil to Hantu and should exist in the meta. If I was going to Mesa, I'd be bringing Qi'ra, simply because I barely have played Hantu variants in the current meta. I'd prioritize my experience more than deck strength. That brings me to the end of this video, and I hope you enjoyed this content. Making these videos is an immense amount of work. This one has taken me going on 12 hours at the time of this take, from data collection through production. Currently, I'm doing this to test out and see if there's interest. If you want to keep seeing content like this, the best thing you can do for now is to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. McClunky Gaming is offering coaching. Please check out the link in the description to join our Discord and reach out for booking. We're offering a wide array of skill sets and coaching options. I hope you check it out. There's a lot to be gained from it. Thanks for watching. Good luck at upcoming events, and may the cards be with you.